This whole conflict between the US and Iran, it feels like it's been going on forever, right? It's just this constant drumbeat of headlines about sanctions, proxy wars, nuclear deals. But what if I told you the real story, the root cause of all of this, isn't about what's happening today? To really get it, we have to go back, way back. And this is where it gets really weird, because it all boils down to this one kind of crazy question. Why is the United States spending billions of dollars trying to shut down a nuclear program that it actually helps start? I know, it sounds nuts, but it's true. Back in 1957, the US gave Iran its very first nuclear reactor. So what on earth changed?
Well, the answer, funnily enough, has absolutely nothing to do with atoms and everything to do with oil. We've got to rewind to the early 1950s, because a single decision made by Iran's democratically elected leader kicked off a chain reaction that, believe it or not, we are still dealing with right now.
Okay, so check this out. In 1951, Iran's new prime minister, a guy named Mossadegh, does something incredibly bold. He says Iran's oil belongs to the Iranian people, not to British companies, and he nationalizes the entire industry. Now in Iran, he's a hero, but in the West, they were furious. So furious, in fact, that just 2 years later, the CIA and Britain's MI6 cook up a plan, a coup, to get rid of him. They kick him out and they install their guy, the pro-Western Shah. And just like that, Iran's oil is back in the hands of Western powers.
We really can't overstate how huge this moment was. For so many Iranians, it was the ultimate betrayal. I mean, imagine, the United States, the country that's all about democracy, had just toppled their elected government, all for oil money. This single event planted this deep, deep seed of resentment. In fact, that infamous chant, "Death to America," this is where it comes from. It was born right here.
Now, controlling Iran's oil was a big deal, but it was really just one piece of a much larger puzzle. See, around this same time, the US was basically redesigning the entire global financial system. And this new system they built would make Middle Eastern oil the absolute bedrock of American power for the next 50 years.
So, in 1971, the US does something that totally shocks the world. It announces that the dollar is no longer backed by gold. This created a massive problem. I mean, how do you convince the world to keep using your currency if it's not really backed by anything? The solution was, frankly, genius. You back it with oil. The US cut a deal to make sure that the world's most important commodity, oil, could only be bought and sold with one currency, the US dollar.
And this move created this incredibly powerful cycle. Think about it. Every country on Earth needs oil. And if oil is only sold in dollars, then every country on Earth needs dollars, all the time. This creates a permanent global demand for American currency. Then, the oil-producing countries take all those billions of dollars, they call them petrodollars, and what do? They invest them right back into the US economy. And in return, the US military protects them. It's this perfect, self-sustaining loop of economic and military dominance.
For a long time, this whole system worked like a charm, and the US-backed Shah of Iran was a key part of it all. But then everything changed. And suddenly, for Iran, getting a nuclear weapon started to look less like a choice and more like a matter of survival.
Because in 1979, the whole thing just exploded. The people of Iran rose up in the Islamic Revolution. They kicked out the US-backed Shah and completely smashed decades of American influence. And in its place, a new government came to power, one that was totally hostile to the United States and the entire Petro-Dollar System. Almost overnight, one of the key pillars holding up America's global power had just become its biggest enemy.
Now, from the new Iranian government's point of view, they were surrounded. And this fear became very real during the horrible Iran-Iraq War, when the US actually backed Saddam Hussein, even though they knew he was using chemical weapons against Iranians. Then, years later, Iran's leaders watched what happened to guys like Saddam in Iraq and Gaddafi in Libya. Both were overthrown after they'd agreed to give up their weapons programs. So the lesson they took away from all this seemed pretty clear. The only real insurance policy to stop the US from coming after you was to get a nuclear bomb.
And that kicked off this 20-year-long game of cat and mouse. In 2002, their secret program gets exposed. The US and Israel hit back with the Stuxnet cyber attack, a computer virus that physically destroyed their equipment. For a brief moment, things cooled down with the 2015 nuclear deal, but then the US just walked away from it in 2018. So what did Iran do? They cranked their uranium enrichment all the way up to 60%. Now, to give you some perspective, you need about 90% for a weapon, so they're getting dangerously close.
So that brings us to today.
Look, Iran knows it can't win a straight-up head-to-head fight with the American military. It's not even close. They don't have the money, they don't have the tech. So they don't even try to play by those rules. Instead, they've become masters of a totally different kind of fighting, asymmetric warfare.
Iran's strategy is pretty clever, and it has a few key parts. First, they use their geography, all those mountains, to hide missile sites and nuclear facilities. Second, they fund a whole network of proxy groups across the region. Think Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis to fight their battles for them. Third, they've gotten really good at building cheap but deadly weapons, like drones and missiles. And finally, the big one, they control the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that 1/5 of the entire world's oil has to pass through.
And this is where their strategy becomes just brutally effective. Take a look at these numbers. Iran can build a drone for about $20,000. To shoot down just one of those drones, the US often has to fire a Patriot interceptor missile that costs around $4 million. You do the math. It's an economic war of attrition that the US literally cannot afford to win.
And hey, this isn't just a theory. In a recent attack, a handful of these cheap Iranian-made drones managed to take out a single advanced US radar system. The price tag on that radar? $300 million. It just shows you how dangerous and effective this whole approach really is.
And this all leads us to their ultimate checkmate. Iran's most powerful weapon isn't a missile or a nuke, it's geography. By threatening to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, they can literally turn off the tap for global oil. They're not just threatening ships anymore. They are threatening the very foundation of the Petro-Dollar System, the very engine of American global power.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy question. This isn't your typical war fought over a piece of land. It's a conflict fought over oil, over financial systems, over national survival. So when the real battlefield is the global economy itself, what does winning even look like?